how's it going, everybody? CNBC article here. Southeast Asia could be the next CV hotspot. These charts show why. The region as a whole reported more than 28,000 cases as of Sunday, with Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore accounting for 87.9% of those cases, according to data by Johns Hopkins University. Several studies suggested that tens of thousands more infections may be undetected due to the low rate of testing in countries such as Indonesia and the Philippines. In Singapore, cases have spiked dramatically in the last 2 weeks, with new clusters of infections found among migrant workers living in packed dormitories. Take a look here at this chart. You can see the cumulative number of cases and the daily increase in cases. The number of virus infections in Southeast Asia has risen quickly in recent weeks, with mounting worries among experts that the region could turn into a hotspot for the fast-spreading disease. The region as a whole reported more than 28,000 cases as of Sunday, which we talked about already. While this region's tally is still far off the hundreds of thousands seen in the US and some European nations, several studies suggest that tens of thousands more infections could be undetected due to the low testing rates in countries such as Indonesia and the Philippines. Meanwhile, in Singapore, cases have spiked dramatically in the last 2 weeks, with new clusters of infections found among migrant workers living in packed dormitories, even as the government's handling of the outbreak was at one time hailed internationally as a model for others to follow. And that's true. Up until recently, even I was giving kudos to Singapore, but you can only do so much, right? The fact is, cases have been ramping up here in Southeast Asia. Simon Tay, chairman of think tank Singapore Institute of International Affairs, told CNBC's Squawk Box Asia last week. Tay said governments must act quickly to contain the outbreak. We do need to act. The Philippine testing numbers, the Indonesian testing numbers are far too low. Capacity to test for the CV vary widely across Southeast Asia. Singapore is among the top globally with 16,203 tests per million people, while Myanmar is close to the bottom with just 85 tests per million people in the population, according to data compiled by statistics site Worldometer. But experts have mostly singled out Indonesia and the Philippines as countries that they are most concerned about because of their large population. Here you see a chart for the testing of it in Southeast Asia. This is per million, so Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. It looks like Brunei and Singapore are way out in front of the other countries here. Indonesia, which has the world's fourth largest population of over 270 million, has conducted around 42,000 tests in total, reported Worldometer. That's the equivalent to 154 tests per million people, one of the lowest globally, according to the site. Indonesian authorities said they aim to conduct 10,000 tests per day and predicted that infections could reach 95,000 as tests are ramped up. Reuters reported. Over in the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte last week approved the procurement of 900,000 more test kits, in addition to 100,000 already in use, reported Reuters, and my guess is those are coming from China. The government has implemented strict lockdown measures, but said its own modeling indicated that 75% of infections, or around 15,000 people, had not been detected, according to the report. Indonesia, Southeast Asia's largest economy, reported its first case of 19 in early March, a development that surprised many observers given the country's extensive air links with China and the city of Wuhan, where the virus first emerged. In contrast, neighboring countries such as Singapore and Malaysia started identifying cases as early as January, with several infected people developing symptoms after visiting Indonesia. Interesting, right? Interesting. Indonesia said they didn't have any cases until March, yet you have individuals from Singapore and Malaysia coming back from Indonesia in January with it. And we don't have to say anything, right? We know. In addition to its lag in testing, the government led by President Joko Widodo, popularly known as Jokowi, has come under criticism for not implementing a nationwide lockdown and banning domestic travel. However, the president has allowed local authorities in the capital city of Jakarta and other areas to implement lockdown measures. It seems like Jokowi has prioritized preserving the economy over preventing the spread of the virus because he fears his legitimacy and hold on power may be at risk. And that's the case for every world leader, right, that's trying to deal with this and trying to figure out where the balance is. Millions of Indonesians typically travel across the country to return to their hometowns and villages at the end of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, which concludes with large feasts and celebration among friends and relatives. That could result in more than 1 million infections by July in Java, the country's most populous island, and home to the capital city of Jakarta, reported Reuters, citing a new model done by University of Indonesia's public health faculty. Reuters reported last week that Doni Monardo, who heads Indonesia's COVID-19 task force, said only the unemployed would be allowed to travel, and they would have to undergo a 14-day quarantine. He stressed that they had a higher chance of staying well outside cities, according to the report. In Singapore, daily cases hit new record levels several times over the past week, despite the government's rigorous quarantine measures and screening process, underscoring the challenges that authorities face in containing the thing. The country was one of the first outside China to report cases of 19 and had kept the number of infections relatively low, allowing schools and businesses to remain open until earlier this month. Most of the new cases that have popped up recently involved migrant workers, many of whom are men from South Asia working in construction. Leong Ho Nam, an infectious disease specialist at Mount Elizabeth Novena Hospital in Singapore, said, "It's a bit embarrassing that the uptick in cases involving foreign migrant workers has come when the government has managed to control the number of imported cases and community transmissions. We've controlled the inbound cases from overseas patients returning. Within the local economy, the numbers have controlled somewhat," he told CNBC's Squawk Box Asia last week. "But for foreign workers who live in dormitories, we really have a big problem controlling there," he added. I thought about the Philippines more so. I hadn't really thought about Malaysia and Indonesia that much, although I have been to all three of those countries, but I hadn't been thinking about Malaysia and Indonesia that much. I had thought about the Philippines because I know they went on a lockdown several weeks ago, and I have in-laws there, so I get updates on that pretty often. And the thing I recently heard was that the lockdown is so severe that they're really keeping people, in a lot of instances, I'm not saying this is always true, I'm not on the ground there obviously, but they're keeping a lot of individuals or limiting the number of individuals that can go out to grocery stores and stuff like that. So obviously when you're talking about a third world country, which I think of Indonesia and Malaysia by and large as well, that if you start to have a situation where there's food shortages, that would be just as detrimental to individuals as well. Because come on, if you're not eating, our bodies can only go so long without food consumption. And it creates a situation where at some point individuals would start to take drastic measures when you have those shortages. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that those countries are like that. And again, I'm not on the ground in any of those places, but I have heard of instances around the world in some places where you have had food shortages, Italy, and then I heard something about it happening in South Africa as well. If you're restricting individuals too much, then you could have a situation where the individuals have to revolt and rise up out of necessity, right? So I was always curious about how the Philippines had such a limited number of cases, but I know that their healthcare system there is a mess and they're so far behind advanced nations. Again, that's part of the reason why they're a third world country. But when you have a situation where a country is really behind in terms of their medical system, then yeah, the numbers look great. Wow, nobody's getting it. But the reality and the situation on the ground is a lot different. And only with ramped up testing can you start to see how severe things are. So we'll see what happens when they get those 900,000 extra test kits in and they start to test more and more people. So quick video, Southeast Asia, next hotspot potentially. Singapore is a bit of a surprise because they did seem to have it under control. But I mean, it just goes to show how difficult it is to control or contain. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.